Hello, students, and welcome to our lesson on absolute value today. We'll start with a do now, and our do now talks about our homework habits. Our do now asks, could your homework habits use a makeover? Make a plan to begin small and improve steadily. Share your plan with your teacher now. And especially with math class, you don't want to save your homeworks up and do them on a weekend. You don't want to skip your homeworks. The homework is always designed to reinforce something that was learned in class. So you definitely don't want to skip that and you don't want to get behind in math. So stay current with your homework if you have homework and do it each night. If you don't have homework, it's a good idea to just study and review what was gone over in class. Start small. If you're somebody who needs a little help with getting in a homework habit, maybe you can decide that 3 days this week you'll do your homework and maybe next week 4 days. So take a few minutes and please reflect on the do now and then come back to the video. Okay, we see we have an exit question, which is going to involve our lesson of absolute value. And we want you to explain in your words, your own words, why absolute value is always positive. So let's go. So we have some key concepts here. We know that the absolute value of a number tells the distance from 0 on a number line. So if we have a number line and we have 0, let's say we have the number 4. The absolute value of this 4 will be the distance from here to here. However, suppose we have a negative 4. The absolute value, the distance from negative 4 to 0 is also 4. So we can also say, even though the absolute value of 4 equals 4, we can also say that the absolute value of negative 4 also equals 4. Because absolute value represents distance, it is always represented with a positive number. And these are those absolute value symbols, like goalposts. So if I'm talking about the absolute value of negative 5, I'm going to put it inside those goalposts because absolute value is always positive. The absolute value of negative 5 equals 5. And in that way, absolute value is always positive because it represents the distance from 0. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go on to some of the problems. We are asked, what is the absolute value of 14? Well, the absolute value of 14 is 14 because it is 14 units from 0 on the number line. What is the absolute value of negative 6? Well, negative 6 is 6 units from the number line, from 0, on the number line. So the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. What is the absolute value of negative 12? Well, negative 12, is 12 units from 0 on the number line. So the absolute value of negative 12 is positive 12. Now we're asked which two numbers have an absolute value of 50. So we can think of the number line, we'll draw one there, with 0 in the middle. And over here we have the number 50. And over here we have the number negative 50. They are opposites on the number line. So which two numbers have an absolute value of 50? And as we see from the number line, both 50 and negative 50 has an absolute value of 50. So we have to put both of those answers. So we're going to put both negative 50, comma, and 50. Both of those numbers have an absolute value of 50 because that is their distance from the number line. So take a minute and do the problems on the right side of the page, pause the video, and then come back. Okay, students, how did you do? Let's check your work. We are asked what is the absolute value of 2.5? And yes, absolute value can be numbers that are not integers. They can be decimals, they can be fractions. So the absolute value of 2.5, we're talking about distance from the number line. So it would be 2.5 units. What is the absolute value of 100? 100 is 100 units from 0 on the number line. So the absolute value of 100 is 100. Let's fix that 0, make it look a little better. There we go. Number 7, what is the absolute value of -3? -3 is 3 units from the number line. So the absolute value of -3 is 3. Now we're asked which two numbers have an absolute value of 5 1/2. Let's draw a number line over here, put 0 in the middle, and the distance from 0 to positive 5 1/2, we'll represent that with the number 5 1/2. But we can also have -5 1/2, and -5 1/2 is also 5 1/2 units from 0 on the number line. Oops, 2, sorry about that. So, which two numbers have an absolute value of 5 1/2? Both -5 1/2 and positive 5 1/2. Let's move on to extra practice. Number one asks us, what is the absolute value of 42? It's already positive, so the absolute value of 42 is 42. Number 2, what is the absolute value of -3.6? -3.6 is 3.6 units from 0 on the number line, so the absolute value is 3.6. Which two numbers have an absolute value of 4? If we think of a number line with 0, we can have 4, we can have -4. So the two numbers that have an absolute value of 4 are, you guessed it, 4 and -4. -4 and 4. So which two numbers can have an absolute value of 10? That would be both -10 and 10. Now, what is the opposite of 11? Again, let's think of a number line. We have 0, and then we have somewhere we have the 11. The opposite of 11 would be -11. So the opposite of positive 11 is -11. Now, what is the opposite of -20? Similar to the problem above, it would be positive 20. Which number does not have an opposite? Well, let's take a look at the number line over here. Number that does not have an opposite is 0. Let's finish up the page. Circle the larger number. Well, if we had a number line, now we're not asking about absolute value here. We would have 0, we would have -4, and we would have -14 somewhere down here. The larger number is always to the right, so as between these two, the larger number is -4. Now we're asked to circle the smaller number. Well, we have to evaluate this absolute value of -4. The absolute value of -4 equals 4, and 4 is larger than -14. So the absolute value of -4 is definitely the larger number. The same goes with number 10. The absolute value of 15 is 15, and 15 is greater than -20. So that would be the larger number. Now here we're asked about, in number 11, the absolute value of negative 10 or 5, and we're asked which is larger. So the absolute value of 5 equals 5. The absolute value of negative 10 equals 10. Which is larger? Well, 10 is larger. So the absolute value of negative 10 is larger than the absolute value of negative 5. Now here, changing it up a little, we're asked to evaluate for the smallest number. The absolute value of 10 is 10. The absolute value of negative 15 is 15. And then we have the 5. So which one is smaller? The 5. Again, we're going to circle the smallest number. We have a negative 8. We have the absolute value of negative 7. The absolute value of negative 7 is 7. And we have a negative 6. So if we look at these on the number line, we have our 0. We have negative 8, negative 6. And then the absolute value of negative 7 is 7. That's somewhere up here. So which is the smaller number? Well, certainly the negative 8 is the smaller number. Here we're asked to tell which is the larger number. So not negative 2 and not negative 1 because we have an 11. The absolute value of 5 is 5, but what's the absolute value of negative 20? Well, the absolute value of negative 20 is 20. So therefore, this is the largest number. How did you do? If you had trouble, go back and think about it again. Now we have some error analysis. We want you to identify and correct each error. So the question was, what is the absolute value of negative 2? Absolute value can never be negative. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2. What is the absolute value of 36? It cannot be negative. The absolute value of 36 is 36. Which two numbers have an absolute value of 14? Well, 14 is one of them, but also negative 14. Which two numbers have an absolute value of 100? Well, 100 is one of those numbers as well as negative 100. What is the opposite of negative 15? Not 0. The opposite of negative 15 is positive 15. Again, always think about the number line when you look at these. So what is the opposite of negative 12? 24 has nothing to do with it. If we have a number line, put 0. If we have negative 12 down here, the opposite would be positive 12. Larger number. Well, the absolute value of negative 5 equals 5. So this is the larger number. Let's say circle the smaller number. We have the absolute value of negative 10 is a positive 10. The absolute value of negative 5 is 5. And the absolute value of 5 is just, we aren't asked about that. So the smaller number, we would actually have a tie between these two because they both equal the same thing. The larger number here, well, the absolute value of negative 24 equals 24. Let's write that so we can read it better. So this would be the larger number. So that's it for absolute value. Go back now and answer your exit ticket. Have a wonderful afternoon.